I was just a servant, hurrying through the Bloodveil Pack's grand hall, making sure every detail of the gathering was perfect, every order placed, every table set. There could be no mistakes. But as I passed the Alpha's sister, Selene, her eyes snapped to me, sharp and cruel. Lazy, filthy. My order isn't ready yet, is it? My throat tightened, and I stammered my apology, explaining everything was on its way. Her hand struck my cheek before I could finish, a sharp, humiliating slap that silenced the room. Tears pricked my eyes as I stumbled backward, heart pounding. And then he appeared. Gabriel, the Lycan King, commanding the hall. His gaze locked on mine, and with a voice that made everyone freeze, his words changed everything that night. The grand hall of the Bloodveil Pack was alive with murmurs of anticipation. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars, casting fractured light over the polished wooden floors and the elegantly arranged tables. Silver platters gleamed, and every flower, every ribbon, every carefully placed decoration spoke of a gathering meant to impress the most influential werewolves in the realm. Among the elite, dressed in their flowing silks and ceremonial furs, Lila Moonshadow moved like a shadow. Her hands flew over trays, adjusting cutlery, straightening goblets, and ensuring that not a single imperfection marred the display she had worked tirelessly to prepare. She had been up since dawn, running from one end of the hall to the other, her feet sore, her arms trembling, but determination burned in her chest. This was more than a gathering. It was an event where mistakes could mean humiliation or dismissal. Lila did not belong to the elite. She was merely a servant, lowly in the hierarchy, yet she took pride in her work, believing that excellence could sometimes speak louder than bloodlines. The murmurs of the pack leaders brushed against her ears as she passed, and she forced herself to ignore them. Some watched with interest, others with casual disdain, but all seemed absorbed in the spectacle of wealth and power surrounding them. The air was heavy with the scent of rich perfumes, rare meats, and tension. Every glance that grazed her felt like a blade, a reminder of how fragile her place was in this world of prestige and ruthless hierarchy. As she moved toward the far end of the hall to check a tray of refreshments, she paused, sensing movement nearby. Her heart skipped a beat when her eyes fell on Selene, the Alpha's sister, seated on her elevated dais. Selene's gaze was sharp, predatory, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the murmur of the hall like ice. Lazy, filthy. Lila's stomach clenched. Her hands froze mid-motion. Every carefully arranged order, every polished tray was suddenly under scrutiny, threatened by Selene's scorn. Lila swallowed hard, words forming in her throat. She had no time for mistakes, no room for hesitation. She stepped closer, ready to defend herself and her work, but something in Selene's expression hinted at a storm that could shatter more than her pride. And then Selene's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile forming at the corner of her lips, as though she already knew exactly how to make Lila crumble. Lila's footsteps echoed lightly against the polished floors of the Bloodveil Pack Hall, a delicate rhythm amidst the hushed chatter of the elite gathering. Her hands hovered over a tray of silver goblets, adjusting one slightly out of line, then another, her focus absolute. Every detail had to be perfect. Any mistake here could haunt her for the rest of her life. She could feel the eyes of nobles, betas, and pack elders tracking her, though most were too busy with their own conversations to intervene. Then her gaze caught Selene, the Alpha's sister, seated like a queen upon her elevated dais. Selene's presence radiated authority, cruelty, and cold elegance all at once. The whispers in the hall seemed to fade as Lila approached. The tray in her hands suddenly felt heavier, each step laden with tension. Lila's stomach tightened as she moved closer, hoping her diligence would be enough to escape notice. But Selene's sharp, calculating eyes found her. "And what do we have here?" Selene's voice rang out, sweet and venomous at the same time, cutting through the soft hum of the gathering. She leaned slightly forward, chin lifted, eyes glinting with disdain. "Is this the work of someone who claims to serve? Lazy, filthy, and not even your orders are in place yet?" The words landed like icy blades. Lila's heart stuttered in her chest. Every ounce of effort she had poured into this gathering, the countless hours of polishing, arranging, and running tirelessly, seemed invisible, dismissed as if it had never existed. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend her work, but Selene's piercing gaze held her silent, sharp and unyielding, a predator studying its prey. Around her, the hall had shifted. Eyes lingered longer than usual on the confrontation, whispers flitting between tables, some curious, some disapproving, others enjoying the spectacle. Lila's chest tightened, and her fingers curled instinctively around the edge of the tray, knuckles white. She had always known Selene could be cruel, but seeing it displayed so openly in front of every pack leader and elite was staggering. The tray trembled slightly in her hands, threatening to spill, her mind racing for a way to appease Selene before the sharp words escalated further. Lila's throat tightened. She had only one choice: speak, apologize, and hope to survive the scrutiny of Selene's wrath. Lila's hands shook slightly as she tried to steady the tray, her chest rising and falling with shallow, anxious breaths. Selene's words still rang in her ears, sharp and cutting. Lazy, filthy. The weight of humiliation pressed down on her like a physical force, yet Lila refused to let it consume her. She had worked too hard, run too far, risked too much to crumble now. "My lady," Lila began, her voice trembling but clear enough to reach Selene. Please, I meant no disrespect. The orders, they are being prepared as instructed. They will be delivered immediately." She bowed slightly, hoping the gesture would convey both humility and earnestness, though she knew Selene's eyes would see only flaw. Selene's lips curved into a thin, cruel smile, and her gaze sharpened like a blade. "Excuses, always excuses. Do you think any of this matters to me? Or anyone in this hall?" Her voice carried easily, every syllable echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Around them, the elites leaned slightly forward, sensing the tension, their eyes flicking between Selene and the trembling servant girl. Lila's mind raced. Words that might placate her, that might explain the delay without inviting more scorn, formed and dissolved in her throat. She swallowed hard, fighting the lump that threatened to choke her. "I only want to serve properly, my lady. Selene's eyes narrowed, her sharp nails tapping lightly against the armrest of her seat. The hall was silent now, every whisper stilled by the mounting tension. Lila felt the room closing in around her, the glittering elite faces blurring at the edges as panic began to creep into her chest. She realized, with a sudden sickening clarity, that no amount of words could truly shield her. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to hide, to vanish into the shadows where she belonged. But she stayed, rooted by a strange, stubborn resolve. She could not yet allow herself to be crushed. Not here. Not before every eye in the hall. And then, through the corner of her vision, she noticed Selene's lips twitch, not in amusement, but in a movement that promised the storm had only begun. Lila's stomach dropped, and her breath caught sharply. Whatever Selene had planned next, it would be worse than she had imagined. Lila's stomach tightened as Selene leaned forward, her gaze sharp and predatory. Every heartbeat thundered in her chest as the cruel smile on Selene's lips grew wider. The words she had just spoken seemed to hang in the air, powerless against the storm brewing in Selene's eyes. Lila's hands tightened around the tray, knuckles white, her breath shallow as she braced herself. "You dare speak to me like that?" Selene hissed, each word a lash that cut deeper than the hall's icy air. Her eyes flicked toward the assembled elites, as though daring them to intervene. None did. Silence had fallen like a heavy shroud, the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes pressing down on Lila, marking her, scrutinizing every move. Before Lila could respond, Selene's hand shot out like a striking serpent. The slap landed with a sharp crack against Lila's cheek, the stings searing through her face and reverberating in her bones. The tray tipped slightly, threatening to spill its precious contents, and Lila's knees buckled as shock and humiliation collided in a wave that left her staggering. Gasps echoed through the hall, whispers swelling into murmurs of astonishment and scandal. For a brief, suspended moment, the world narrowed to the fiery sting across her cheek, the judging eyes, and the icy fury emanating from Selene. Lila's vision blurred with tears, hot and sudden, but she forced herself to stand tall, refusing to collapse entirely. The tray nearly slipped from her grasp, but she managed to clutch it, her trembling hands betraying the storm within her. All around her, the elites exchanged looks of astonishment. Some leaned forward, whispering scandalous commentary. Others simply stared, frozen by the audacity of the display. Lila could feel her cheeks burning with shame, but beneath it, something raw and fierce began to stir, a mixture of fear, indignation, and a strange, unfamiliar spark of defiance. Selene sat back, lips curling in triumph, clearly satisfied with the humiliation she had wrought. But Lila's eyes, brimming with tears, were no longer cast downward. Somewhere deep within, a shift had begun. The servant who had been invisible, powerless, and overlooked was awakening, and even she could feel it. The elites had witnessed the strike, but they did not yet realize that the consequences of this single, brutal act would ripple far beyond the walls of the hall. The sting of Selene's hand lingered on Lila's cheek, a burning reminder of both humiliation and helplessness. Every whisper in the hall felt like another slap, each glance another reminder that she was powerless before the elites. Her heart pounded in her chest, raw and uneven, as she realized that nothing she did would erase the public shame Selene had inflicted. Hands trembling, she clutched the tray to her chest, moving backward slowly, trying not to stumble over the polished floor. Her steps were careful, deliberate, yet every eye in the hall followed her retreat. The whispers grew louder, a symphony of judgment and curiosity that pressed down on her shoulders. Some voices murmured scandal and gossip. Others, surprised by the Alpha's sister's cruelty, simply watched in stunned silence. Lila's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed openly. She forced herself to breathe, steadying each inhale and exhale, and telling herself she would not collapse here. She had endured worse, yes, but never in front of so many influential werewolves, never under so many eyes that could twist her humiliation into mockery or ridicule. She could feel the weight of centuries of pack hierarchy pressing down on her tiny shoulders. Yet, beneath the fear, beneath the burning shame, there was a flicker of something stronger, defiance. Lila reminded herself that she had worked tirelessly to make this gathering flawless. Every tray she had placed, every flower she had straightened, every delicate arrangement, it had all been her doing. She might be a servant, overlooked and lowly in the eyes of the elite, but she had not failed in her duties. That thought, fragile and trembling, was the seed of her courage. Slowly, she moved to the edge of the hall, to the shadows where the grand chandelier's light softened and the harsh gaze of Selene could no longer reach her fully. She sank down onto a low step, hands still clutching the tray, her body trembling not just from fear, but from adrenaline and suppressed anger. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a whisper of intuition warned her this humiliation was not the end, it was the beginning. And already, in the corner of the grand hall, a presence stirred, observing, silent yet unmistakable. Lila crouched in the shadowed corner of the grand hall, her tray clutched tightly against her chest, trembling hands hidden beneath it. The sting of Selene's slap still throbbed across her cheek, burning both skin and pride. Around her, the elite continued their murmurs, exchanging whispers and glances that carried judgment, fascination, or barely concealed amusement. Yet the voices no longer pierced her as sharply. Her thoughts were tangled with the humiliation she had endured and the strange, growing awareness that she was being watched. Across the hall, near the dais, a ripple moved through the crowd as the air seemed to shift. Eyes that were colder than frost, sharper than daggers, fixed on her from a distance. Gabriel, the Lycan King, feared and revered across Pack territories, had risen to his full, commanding height. His presence demanded silence. Even the elite who dared to scoff earlier found themselves holding their breath. Every whisper died before it left their lips. Lila, barely daring to breathe, felt the weight of his gaze settle on her. There was no anger in his eyes at her trembling form, no judgment for her status as a servant. Instead, there was a flicker of something different: interest, curiosity, and something deeper, raw and unreadable. It unsettled her. Her pulse accelerated, and for a moment she forgot the sting of the slap and the humiliation of Selene's cruelty. She was aware only of the piercing intensity of Gabriel's gaze, the quiet authority that radiated from him like heat from a flame. Around him, the elites shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unspoken power dynamic shift. Whispers of his presence and reputation buzzed through the room like static electricity, but no one dared speak. Gabriel's attention remained fixed on Lila, unflinching, as if the entire hall and its intricate hierarchy existed only for this single moment. A shiver ran down Lila's spine. Something in the way he observed her, calm, commanding, yet undeniably aware of her vulnerability, made her feel both exposed and protected at the same time. And as his eyes narrowed slightly, a promise of intervention seemed to hang in the air, silent but palpable. The gathering continued around them, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing, but Lila knew, instinctively, that her life had just changed forever. The grand hall, once filled with murmurs and cautious whispers, fell into a strange, tense silence as Gabriel moved. Each step he took toward Lila was deliberate, measured, yet impossible to ignore. Even the elites, who prided themselves on their composure, could not help but straighten in their seats, feeling the weight of his presence. He was power incarnate, tall, broad-shouldered, every movement precise, exuding authority that seemed to push back the very air around him. Lila remained crouched in the shadowed corner, her hands still gripping the tray, knuckles white from tension. The fear she had felt moments before mingled now with an unfamiliar, fluttering awareness. Gabriel's gaze had found her, and though it was calm, there was an intensity beneath it that made her pulse quicken. Every step he took seemed to echo inside her chest, each one a reminder that she was no longer just a servant, at least not in the eyes of the Lycan King. Around the hall, whispers began to ripple, like waves, quickly suppressed as Gabriel's commanding aura settled over the crowd. No one dared speak. Every eye followed him as he approached the corner where Lila crouched, his long coat flowing like dark water around him, the faint gleam of his wolfish presence radiating subtly, an almost imperceptible shimmer that spoke of strength, dominance, and control. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Lila could feel the heat radiating from his body, but not so close as to be threatening. His eyes softened just slightly as they met hers, conveying an unspoken understanding. She had been wronged, and he had noticed. He inclined his head in a subtle, almost respectful acknowledgement of her courage, even in the face of humiliation. The elites held their collective breath. No one had dared to challenge Selene openly. Her cruelty had gone unopposed for years. Yet here stood Gabriel, moving against tradition, disregarding protocol, and heading straight for a trembling servant girl. It was audacious. It was unprecedented. And Lila, heart pounding, dared not blink. The tension coiled around her like a living thing. She sensed that the course of her life, and perhaps the balance of power in the entire hall, was about to shift irrevocably. Gabriel's eyes, sharp and commanding, never left Lila as he lowered himself slightly, kneeling with deliberate calm before her. The subtle shift in posture, meant to show respect, sent a ripple of astonishment through the gathered elites. A servant being addressed directly by the Lycan King in such a manner was unheard of, and the audacity of the act left everyone frozen, breaths held in suspense. Lila's hands shook as she gripped the tray, knuckles white, heart hammering against her chest. She barely dared to look up, her body taut with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and the faintest flicker of awe. Gabriel's presence was overwhelming, powerful, intimidating, yet strangely protective. The air around him seemed to hum, an invisible tension binding the room, drawing every gaze toward the extraordinary moment unfolding. "My lady," Gabriel began, his voice smooth and resonant, carrying effortlessly through the hall. "You have been wronged. The actions taken against you are unacceptable, and I apologize on behalf of those who have caused you harm." Each syllable rang with authority, an undeniable declaration that Selene's cruelty would no longer go unchecked. Whispers erupted among the elites, hushed but buzzing with astonishment. Heads turned, some in shock, others in envy, as the Lycan King, feared and revered across countless territories, knelt, ever so slightly, before a trembling servant girl. The audacity, the power, and the unprecedented nature of the gesture left every noble present in stunned silence. Lila's throat tightened, and she struggled to find words. No one had ever offered her such acknowledgement, let alone in front of the entire elite gathering. A warmth, almost foreign, bloomed in her chest, mingling with the fear and adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She realized that her life, the rigid hierarchy she had lived within for so long, was shifting beneath her feet. Gabriel's gaze softened just enough to convey a quiet promise of protection, yet his posture remained commanding, a subtle warning that anyone who dared cross her again would answer to him. The tension in the hall was palpable. The elites leaned forward, unable to look away, waiting for what would come next. Lila's pulse quickened, a sense of disbelief mixing with cautious hope. The servant girl who had been humiliated moments ago was now at the center of the Lycan King's attention, and the course of the gathering and her life was changing before her eyes. Gabriel's gaze swept the hall, sharp and unwavering, before returning to Lila. The murmurs of the elites had reached a low hum, buzzing with astonishment, disbelief, and barely concealed scandal. Few could comprehend the audacity of what they were witnessing. The feared Lycan King, kneeling ever so slightly, turning the attention of the entire pack hierarchy toward a lowly servant. Then, in a voice that cut through the silence like steel, Gabriel spoke again, firmer this time. "From this moment forward, she is my Luna." The hall froze. The words, simple yet explosive, sent shockwaves through the gathered elites. Heads turned sharply, jaws slackened, and eyes widened as the full implications became clear. Lila, a servant who had spent her life moving unnoticed among the shadows of the elite, had been elevated, claimed publicly by the most feared and powerful Lycan in all territories. Her status had changed irreversibly. Lila's hands trembled violently as she clutched the tray to her chest. Her eyes widened, disbelief and awe mingling as she tried to comprehend the enormity of Gabriel's declaration. Her heart raced, thundering against her ribcage, as if trying to match the intensity of the room. For the first time, she felt a power beyond her own rising within her, a connection, an unspoken bond with the Lycan King who now openly defended her. The elites shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispers erupting like sparks in a dry forest. Some glared at Gabriel, anger and envy flickering in their eyes. Others whispered excitedly, already speculating on the political implications. Lila could barely focus on anything beyond the gaze of the man who had just changed her life. He watched her closely, silently measuring her response, as if testing whether she could meet the challenge of this new elevated role. Lila's pulse thundered in her ears. Fear, awe, and an unfamiliar surge of confidence swirled inside her. The room had shifted around her. The hierarchies she had once known no longer mattered. Yet deep in her chest, a quiet warning whispered. Claiming her was only the beginning. Danger, intrigue, and unforeseen consequences awaited just beyond the edges of this extraordinary moment. Her lips parted slightly, almost to speak, but no words came. She realized, with a shiver, that her life had irrevocably changed, and that the elites would never let her rise without scrutiny, challenge, or threat. The hull, already tense from Gabriel's unprecedented declaration, grew heavier still. Whispers erupted into sharp murmurs as the elites tried to process what had just transpired. Some clutched their goblets in astonishment. Others leaned forward, curiosity and dread warring in their expressions. Lila stood frozen, clutching the tray, unsure whether to tremble with fear or awe at the magnitude of the moment. Gabriel's gaze swept over the gathered elites like a storm, calm yet unyielding. Every eye followed him, each breath caught in anticipation of his next move. Then, with deliberate authority, he raised a hand. The room fell silent. A hush so complete that the faintest creak of the floorboards sounded deafening. "The treaty," Gabriel's voice rang clear, resonant and unwavering, "will not proceed under the current circumstances." Gasps rippled through the elites, some so loud they echoed off the ornate walls. The carefully arranged alliances, the subtle negotiations, the months of preparation, all paused, frozen under the weight of Gabriel's pronouncement. A chill ran down Lila's spine as she realized that this simple declaration carried monumental consequences. Heads turned sharply toward Selene, whose expression had shifted from smug triumph to shock, anger, and disbelief. The audacity of being challenged in such a public manner, The humiliation she had so carefully orchestrated had been shattered by Gabriel's intervention. Her eyes narrowed dangerously, flicking to Lila, who still clutched the tray as though it could anchor her in this whirlwind of scrutiny. Gabriel's voice continued, steady and commanding, leaving no room for dispute. The only path forward is for the Alpha's sister to kneel before my Luna and apologize publicly. Only then will the treaty be allowed to continue. The murmurs grew louder again, now a mixture of disbelief, excitement, and apprehension. Some packs shifted uneasily, realizing that their carefully laid plans had been derailed by a single audacious act. The balance of power was visibly shifting, and the implications of Gabriel's demand hung heavily in the air. Lila's heart raced, a mix of fear and growing resolve pulsing through her veins. She understood, suddenly and clearly, that the path ahead would not be easy, yet a quiet spark of determination ignited within her. The world she had known, one of shadows, servitude, and humiliation, was gone. In its place lay danger, intrigue, and the faintest promise of something far greater. The hall remained tense, the collective breath of the elites held in anxious anticipation. Gabriel's declaration hung in the air like a storm cloud, crackling with authority and promise of upheaval. Lila's hands still clutched the tray, though it had long since ceased to hold any purpose beyond grounding her in this surreal moment. Every eye in the room was on her now, and every whisper, every glance carried weight she had never experienced. Gabriel's gaze swept the hall again, commanding, unflinching. The treaty cannot proceed until Selene kneels before my Luna and offers a public apology, he announced, his voice measured yet resolute. This apology must take place in the sacred clearing, in full view of the assembled packs. Only then will the gathering resume. A stunned silence fell. The elites, once comfortably ensconced in their ranks of power and influence, now found themselves at the mercy of an unforeseen decree. Some paled at the audacity of the demand. Others exchanged worried glances, realizing that alliances forged over months could be undone in a single audacious stroke. Whispers grew, a low hum of shock and speculation spreading like wildfire through the room. Selene's eyes widened, fury and disbelief clashing within them. Her perfectly controlled composure wavered as the reality of the situation sank in. Kneeling publicly before a servant girl, a Luna no less, was unthinkable. Yet the Lycan King's authority left no room for negotiation. Lila could see it in the sharp precision of Gabriel's stance, in the unyielding fire in his eyes. There would be no compromise. Lila herself felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Fear coursed through her veins, for she understood the dangerous implications of standing at the center of such a power shift. Yet beneath it, a fierce, unsteady surge of confidence ignited. The moment was hers to navigate, hers to survive, and perhaps even to wield. She was no longer invisible. She had been claimed, protected, and elevated. The elites stirred uneasily, sensing the seismic shift of hierarchy. Their attention, once firmly on the political maneuvers and ceremonies, was now drawn to the tension between Lila and Selene, the impossible demand, and the quiet power radiating from Gabriel. In the silence that followed, Lila realized that the gathering would never be the same. Lila's pulse had not yet settled. The words Gabriel had spoken, the authority in his tone, and the unyielding protection he offered created a whirlwind of emotions inside her. Fear, disbelief, and an unexpected, intoxicating sense of safety. She still clutched the tray, though it had long ceased to serve any practical purpose. It was as if holding onto it kept her anchored in a world that was shifting beneath her feet. Gabriel stepped back slightly, enough to give her space, yet close enough that she could feel the quiet warmth of his presence. His gaze never left her, steady and unflinching, assessing not just her appearance, but her reaction, her courage, and perhaps even the strength he could sense lurking beneath the meek exterior she had worn all her life. The intensity of his attention sent a shiver down her spine, thrilling and terrifying all at once. Around them, the elites remained frozen in astonishment. The room had become a stage, with Lila and Gabriel at its center, and the political undercurrents surged like a tide, invisible yet undeniable. Every whisper, every sideways glance seemed to amplify the tension. Lila could feel their eyes on her, questioning whether she could rise to the challenge, whether she could withstand the scrutiny and danger she now faced. And yet, despite the fear, a strange warmth pooled in her chest. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. A connection, fragile and tentative, had begun to form. Gabriel's protective authority, his recognition of her worth, and the quiet power in his presence sparked something inside her, a tentative trust, a fragile hope, and a curiosity she had never dared to entertain. She dared to meet his eyes briefly, and in that fleeting connection, something shifted. It was as if an invisible thread had been tied between them, a tether that promised both protection and challenge, danger and discovery. Lila's heartbeat quickened, and a flush rose to her cheeks, but she did not look away. The elites, sensing the subtle tension, whispered with a mixture of speculation and alarm. The balance of power was no longer as it had been, and the consequences of Gabriel's actions were only beginning to unfold. The echoes of Gabriel's declaration still lingered in the grand hall, vibrating through every whispered conversation and sidelong glance. The elites, once secure in their rigid hierarchies, now found themselves unsettled, caught between fascination, disbelief, and quiet outrage. Lila, still clutching the tray, had retreated slightly to a corner, but she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes analyzing her every move. Every whisper, every hushed murmur carried a question. Who was she to command the attention and allegiance of the Lycan King himself? The murmurs began as gentle currents, threads of speculation that wound their way through the elite circles. Did you see that? Gabriel actually kneeling before her? One noble whispered, barely audible. Another leaned closer, voice laced with incredulity. A servant? His Luna? This is unprecedented. Can she truly hold such a role? Lila's ears burned as fragments of their conversations drifted to her. She fought to focus on the tray in her hands, but every word felt like a pebble thrown at her chest. She had risen from invisibility to prominence in the blink of an eye, and the weight of scrutiny pressed down with almost suffocating intensity. Yet beneath the anxiety, a subtle pride flickered, an acknowledgement that she had been claimed, seen, and, in some strange way, protected. The elites were not the only ones gossiping. Betas and lesser pack members shifted uneasily in their seats, exchanging glances that mixed curiosity and caution. Lila could feel the political tremors spreading outward, reaching far beyond the walls of the hall. Alliances would be questioned, loyalties tested, and those who had underestimated her would now find themselves recalculating. Gabriel's presence, calm yet commanding, anchored her, but even he could not shield her from the whispers that slithered through the gathering. Lila realized that with her new position came not just protection, but visibility, and every eye in the room would now judge, test, and challenge her. A subtle tension prickled at the back of her neck. She sensed that some among the elites were already plotting, while others watched with quiet envy, calculating how to manipulate this new dynamic. The air felt charged, thick with intrigue, and for the first time, Lila understood that her rise would not go unchallenged. Selene's eyes burned with a storm of anger, her perfectly poised composure beginning to crack at the edges. The murmurs of the elites only fueled her fury, a chorus of disbelief and whispered admiration for Lila's sudden elevation, igniting the fire within her. She had always been untouchable, the center of power in the Bloodveil hierarchy. Yet, in a single moment, her carefully constructed image of dominance had been shattered. Her fingers curled tightly around the armrest of her seat, knuckles whitening as her jaw clenched. Every fiber of her being seethed with indignation, not merely for the slap that had been thwarted by Gabriel, but for the audacity of the servant who now stood at the center of attention, claimed by the Lycan King himself. How dare someone so lowly be elevated above her, in front of all the elites? Her pride demanded vengeance, and her mind immediately began calculating the paths to reclaim it. Selene's thoughts raced, plotting strategies and subtle manipulations. She would humiliate Lila at the next opportunity, undermine her decisions, and sow discord among the packs. Perhaps a misstep in service, a mismanaged task, or a whispered rumor. Anything to remind the world that Lila was still nothing more than a servant girl, and that Selene's authority remained unchallenged. Around her, the elites watched in quiet fascination, sensing the tension that radiated from the Alpha's sister. Few dared speak, knowing that Selene's wrath could be as subtle as it was lethal. Yet even they began to understand that this quiet fury, simmering beneath a composed exterior, would not be contained. Lila, standing slightly apart, could feel the invisible heat of Selene's anger pressing against her. A shiver ran down her spine as she realized that the servant's newfound position came with immediate peril. The whispers, the glances, the plotting, it was all part of the dangerous game she had unwillingly entered. Her pulse quickened, and her inner wolf stirred, sensing the hostility before any words were spoken. Selene's fury was not just personal. It was a challenge, a declaration that she would not yield easily. And in that moment, Lila understood that the path forward would be treacherous. Lila's chest heaved as the heat of Selene's fury pressed down on her like a physical force. Her vision blurred at the edges, not from tears this time, but from the rising storm within her. The fear that had once paralyzed her began to twist into something sharper, wilder, and untamed. A power she had long buried beneath years of servitude and self-doubt. Her pulse throbbed in sync with the faint, almost imperceptible growl echoing in her mind. It was subtle at first, a whisper of instinct, a thread of raw energy that urged her to stand taller, to claim her own presence, to reject the humiliation that Selene sought to impose. She could feel it coiling in her chest, a warmth spreading outward, her wolf stirring in response to the tension, to the danger, to the injustice. Around her, the elites continued their whispers, some watching with fascination, others with barely disguised disdain. Lila's hands clenched the tray tighter, knuckles white, but it no longer felt like a shield, more like a reminder that she had survived worse, and that she could survive this, too. Her eyes flicked to Selene, who sat poised yet simmering with suppressed rage, and Lila felt the first spark of defiance flare within her. A low growl bubbled in her throat, almost involuntarily, startling even herself. The sensation was thrilling, terrifying, and intoxicating all at once. Her pulse accelerated as her senses sharpened. Every movement, every whisper, every subtle shift in the room became hyper-real, almost painfully vivid. She was aware of the power she carried, even if she could not yet fully control it. Gabriel's gaze found hers again, sharp, observant, and approving in a way that both emboldened and unnerved her. He did not need to intervene. She felt his presence as a steady anchor, as though he could sense the awakening force within her, the stirrings of her wolf rising to meet the challenge before her. Gabriel's eyes never left Lila. Even as whispers swirled around the grand hall and the elites jostled uneasily in their seats, he stood like a sentinel, his presence commanding the room and shielding her from overt scrutiny. He had seen the flicker of defiance in her eyes, the subtle tremor of her hands, and the first stirrings of her inner wolf, and he found it intriguing. He observed her closely, noting how she straightened imperceptibly, how her jaw set itself in quiet determination despite the storm of judgment pressing from all sides. Every small gesture spoke volumes, small sparks of courage and instinctual awareness that most would overlook. But Gabriel did not overlook. He had survived decades by reading the faintest signals, understanding the currents beneath surface appearances, and he could see that Lila was far from ordinary. Her wolf, he could feel it, even at this distance. A latent power, restrained yet simmering, responding to the tension, the injustice, and the adrenaline coursing through her veins. It was subtle, but potent, a hidden strength ready to be honed and directed. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that he recognized both her potential and the danger she might face. Around them, the elites whispered nervously. Some were fascinated, some suspicious, and some outright jealous. None could predict the consequences of Gabriel's actions, the ripple effects that Lila's rise and claim as Luna would cause among the delicate hierarchies of the packs. But he could, and he would ensure that she was protected, at least until she could fully step into her newfound role. Gabriel's gaze softened, ever so slightly, as he noted Lila's subtle struggle, the tight grip on the tray, the slight quiver in her lips, and the sparks of defiance flickering beneath her fear. He saw the raw potential waiting to be unleashed, and he was both curious and cautious. She would need guidance, and he would provide it, but only if she proved capable of embracing her strength. Lila, sensing his eyes upon her, felt a mixture of fear and comfort, confusion, and an unfamiliar pull toward the man who had claimed her in front of all the elites. Something unspoken passed between them, a promise of protection, challenge, and the stirring beginnings of trust. The murmurs of the elites still hummed through the grand hall, but amid the tension and whispers, a subtle shift occurred. A figure detached from the gathered elites, moving with careful discretion toward Lila. He was a beta of the Bloodveil Pack, someone she had seen only in passing during her duties, observant, calm, and quietly influential. His presence alone suggested awareness of the political undercurrents swirling like a storm around her. Lila, he murmured softly, stopping just within earshot so the elites would not overhear. His voice carried authority tempered with empathy, a rare combination in a pack rife with hierarchy and rivalry. You're drawing attention, powerful attention. Not all of it is friendly. Lila blinked up at him, still clutching the tray, her chest tight with anxiety. I don't know what to do, she admitted quietly, voice trembling, more from the sheer weight of the gathering than from fear alone. I've never been in this position before. He nodded, understanding the enormity of what she faced. No one expects a servant to rise in a single moment, but Gabriel has claimed you as Luna, and that changes everything. You are no longer invisible. Every step you take will be watched, judged, and tested. But you are not powerless. Not anymore. Lila's pulse quickened. The words were both comforting and terrifying, a reminder of the responsibility and danger she now bore. The beta leaned closer, offering subtle guidance in hushed tones. Observe, learn quickly, and trust your instincts. The elites will test you, Selene more than anyone, but you have strength inside you they cannot see yet. Your wolf will guide you when your mind is uncertain. For the first time, Lila felt a flicker of hope beyond fear. Someone who understood the stakes had offered guidance. someone who recognized that she was more than her status as a servant. She drew a slow, steadying breath, letting the warmth of cautious alliance ease the tight coil of tension in her chest. As the beta stepped back into the shadows, melding once again with the crowd, Lila realized that survival and eventual triumph would require allies as much as courage. She was not entirely alone. The hall had finally emptied, leaving only flickering torchlight and the faint echo of distant footsteps. Lila stepped out into the moonlit courtyard, the cool night air brushing against her flushed skin. Her chest heaved as she absorbed the events of the evening, the humiliation, the shock, the audacity of Gabriel's claim, and the sudden elevation of her status. Each moment played over in her mind like a scene from a story she could scarcely believe was hers. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the cobblestones, and Lila found a quiet corner to collect her thoughts. She let the tray fall from her trembling hands, the clatter grounding her in the present. Her pulse still raced, a mixture of adrenaline, fear, and something unfamiliar, an awakening pride that tugged at her chest. She had survived Selene's cruelty, endured the scrutiny of the elite, and now carried the mark of the Lycan King himself. Beneath the weight of it all, she felt her inner wolf stirring, its presence coiling around her instincts, urging her to grow, to adapt, to claim her place. Every sense was heightened: the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of wolves, the subtle shift of the night breeze. She realized that the world she had known, the world of shadows and servitude, was gone. She had been thrust into a realm of power, danger, and expectation. A quiet thought crossed her mind. Gabriel had not only claimed her, he had recognized something within her, a strength she had never acknowledged herself. And though fear lingered, a spark of something more intense ignited: curiosity, fascination, and the first hints of a trust she could barely name. The tension of the day, the whispers of the elites, and even Selene's growing fury now seemed part of a larger tapestry, one that she would have to navigate with cunning, courage, and instinct. She lifted her gaze to the full moon, silver light bathing her in ethereal glow. The night was vast and endless, yet for the first time, Lila felt a sense of possibility intertwined with peril. The world had shifted, and she was no longer invisible, no longer weak. But the stakes had never been higher. The dawn broke over the Bloodveil territory, painting the forests in streaks of gold and silver as Lila moved among the shadows of the estate. The events of the elite gatherings still weighed on her mind, each moment replaying with vivid clarity. The slap, Gabriel's claim, the whispers, and the subtle power that had stirred within her. Today, however, there would be no spectators, no hiding in the corners. The sacred clearing awaited, and with it, the ultimate test of her newfound status and courage. She walked along the edge of the training grounds, where the air was thick with the scent of earth, dew, and growing tension. Gabriel had arranged for a private session, subtle guidance and observation meant to hone her instincts and prepare her for the trials ahead. The weight of his eyes, unseen but ever present, pressed gently on her shoulders. She could almost feel his presence alongside her, a silent reassurance that she was no longer alone in navigating the treacherous currents of pack politics. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her garments and steadied her breath. The inner wolf, which had begun to stir during the elite's gathering, now pulsed stronger, a low hum of instinct coiling through her chest. Each heartbeat seemed to sync with the rhythm of the forest, the silent power within her waiting for command. She could feel strength, raw and untested, and knew that control would be the key to survival in the days to come. The clearing itself loomed in her mind, a sacred space where the largest pack gathering would be held, where Selene's apology would be demanded, and where Lila's courage would be measured. Every step she took, every motion of her body, carried the weight of anticipation and fear. She ran through the protocols in her mind. Maintain composure, trust instincts, remain unwavering, and above all, command respect, even from those who doubted her. A rustle in the underbrush drew her attention. The beta who had guided her before stepped forward, offering subtle encouragement and reassurance. Trust yourself, Lila. The packs will sense your strength, even if they don't see it yet. Remember, Gabriel believes in you. A shiver ran through her, not from cold, but from the realization that she was stepping into a storm where loyalty, power, and danger intertwined, and that her first move could determine her fate. Selene's fury had not cooled. If anything, it had sharpened into a dangerous, calculated precision. She prowled the corridors and hidden passages of the Bloodveil estate, her mind alight with schemes to humiliate Lila before the sacred gathering even began. Every detail mattered: the timing, the optics, the subtle manipulations that would cast doubt on the Luna's competence and shake the confidence of the assembled packs. Lila, unaware of the exact nature of Selene's plotting, felt a subtle tension in the air. The servants whispered, the guards exchanged wary glances, and the faint scent of fear and ambition mingled like a storm on the horizon. She moved with careful precision, practicing the routines Gabriel had guided her through, each step deliberate, each breath measured. She would not falter, but instinct warned her that Selene was already setting traps. The first attempt came subtly. Lila reached for ceremonial garments intended for the gathering, only to discover that they had been intentionally misplaced, threads tangled and delicate fabrics wrinkled. A surge of frustration threatened to overwhelm her, but she took a deep breath, centering herself. Her inner wolf stirred at the injustice, a low hum of protective instinct warning her to trust her senses and stay alert. Selene's presence loomed at the periphery, unseen yet palpable, as she observed Lila's struggle from a hidden vantage. A smirk curled her lips. She had intended to undermine Lila's composure, to expose vulnerability before the largest pack gathering in history. Every movement, every subtle hesitation would be noted and twisted into scandal if Lila faltered. Yet Lila adapted. Her hands moved with nimble precision, reorganizing the garments and correcting the subtle sabotage without drawing attention. The inner wolf within her pulsed stronger, guiding her fingers, sharpening her awareness, and steadying her nerves. She realized that these trials were not just about the ceremony. They were tests of her instincts, resilience, and emerging power. By the time the preparations concluded, Lila stood taller, her eyes bright with determination. Selene's subtle sabotage had been thwarted, and in that moment, Lila recognized her own strength, the quiet, unyielding force that had begun to rise within her. The clearing loomed ahead, bathed in the pale silver of the rising moon. Lila's steps were measured, each one a testament to the resolve that had been building inside her since Gabriel's declaration. The echoes of Selene's plotting still lingered in her mind, a reminder that danger did not always announce itself with fanfare. Every instinct whispered caution, but the inner wolf that had stirred during the past weeks now pulsed with unwavering determination, coiling within her like a living flame. Selene emerged from the shadows, her expression a mask of icy control, though the sharpness in her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. She moved toward Lila with the grace of a predator, intending to intimidate and dominate. The elites had begun gathering at the edges of the clearing, sensing the tension and holding their breath. "You think you belong here?" Selene's voice was a sharp hiss, carrying across the night air. A A servant daring to claim the respect of the Lycan King? Pathetic. Lila's chest rose and fell as she steadied herself. The tray she had carried was long gone. All that remained was the strength coursing through her veins, the wolf coiling within her, the quiet authority that Gabriel's claim had awakened. Her voice, steady yet firm, cut through the tension. I belong because I was chosen. Your opinion does not define me. A ripple of surprise passed through the onlookers. Selene's face contorted with fury, but Lila did not waver. Her eyes glinted with a newfound confidence, a reflection of the inner wolf now fully alert and aligned with her mind. She stood tall, shoulders back, every motion deliberate, radiating an authority that demanded recognition. Gabriel, positioned a few steps behind, watched closely, his presence a quiet reassurance. The pull between them was subtle yet undeniable, and Lila felt the strength of his watchful gaze reinforcing her courage. The night air seemed to crackle with anticipation as Selene's fury met Lila's resolve. Every onlooker sensed that a decisive moment was approaching, one that would test Lila's ability to claim her place and assert her power before the entire pack. Gabriel stepped forward, his presence commanding yet measured, moving with the quiet authority of a king who needed no proclamation to assert dominance. The elites in the clearing instinctively gave space, sensing that his proximity was both protective and declarative. Lila felt the weight of his gaze, a steady anchor in the storm of Selene's fury, and a subtle warmth eased the tension coiling in her chest. He spoke softly, just enough for her to hear. Trust yourself, Lila. Stand firm. You are stronger than you realize. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience and the unspoken promise that he would intervene if the balance tipped too far. Lila's pulse quickened at the sound of his voice, a mixture of comfort and awareness that she was not entirely alone in this dangerous game. The inner wolf within her stirred at the resonance of his presence, coiling and expanding, ready to defend, to react, to claim space alongside her. She drew a steadying breath, feeling the power within her synchronize with the confidence he instilled. Selene, for all her fury, hesitated as she sensed the magnetic authority radiating from Gabriel. His mere presence shifted the energy in the clearing, reminding everyone that he was both protector and arbiter, and that Lila's claim as his Luna carried weight beyond her own understanding. The power dynamic was unmistakable. Gabriel's subtle support was enough to embolden Lila while signaling to Selene and the watching elites that interference would be perilous. As the moonlight glinted off the clearing, Gabriel's sharp eyes never left Lila, noting the delicate balance between her fear, courage, and burgeoning strength. He allowed her to stand, to claim her own presence fully, yet his proximity served as both shield and subtle encouragement, reinforcing that she could face Selene without faltering. In that moment, an unspoken connection deepened between them. The air crackled with tension, authority, and a nascent understanding that went beyond words. Lila felt the pull of his guidance, the promise of protection, and an unfamiliar stirring of trust and curiosity that she could not yet name. The clearing was alive with quiet unrest. While Lila and Gabriel held the center, the leaders of the other packs whispered among themselves, their eyes darting back and forth as they gauged the shifting dynamics. Alliances, once thought secure, now trembled under the weight of Gabriel's audacious claim and Lila's unexpected rise. Every gesture, every glance was scrutinized, analyzed, and weighed against the invisible scales of power and loyalty. Lila remained at the forefront, her senses sharp, her wolf coiling quietly within her, attuned to the subtle movements around the clearing. She could feel the energy of scrutiny pressing against her from all sides, the elites, the betas, and the visiting pack leaders. Some looked impressed, their respect tempered with caution, while others masked envy or thinly veiled disdain. She realized that her standing was no longer determined solely by Gabriel's protection. She would have to navigate the intricate currents of pack politics herself. Gabriel remained a few steps behind, his eyes scanning the crowd with calculated precision. He noticed the murmurs and the tension, assessing which leaders were loyal, which were opportunistic, and which might be swayed by subtle provocations. His focus, however, never wavered from Lila. He knew that the precarious balance of power depended not just on his authority, but on Lila's ability to assert herself, to project strength, and to survive the subtle tests that the elites would impose. A beta from a neighboring pack leaned toward his leader, whispering hurriedly about the audacity of the situation. A servant girl, claimed by the Lycan King himself? The leader's eyes narrowed, calculating the potential repercussions for their own pack. Every word, every movement was loaded with strategy, and Lila could sense the invisible web of observation tightening around her. Despite the pressure, Lila drew a deep, steadying breath. The inner wolf pulsed insistently within her, a quiet reassurance that she was capable, that she could respond when necessary, and that she was beginning to understand the weight of her own emerging power. The moon had climbed higher, casting silver light across the clearing and illuminating the tension that hummed like electricity in the night air. Lila stood at the center, senses sharpened, heart pounding in sync with the subtle rhythms of the forest around her. The elite's scrutiny weighed heavily, yet the pulse of her inner wolf gave her courage and clarity, a quiet strength growing stronger with each breath. Gabriel stepped closer, his presence both grounding and exhilarating. The subtle warmth of him radiated toward her, an unspoken reassurance, a silent promise that she was not facing the storm alone. "Lila," he murmured, low and steady, his voice carrying just enough to reach her ears without disturbing the delicate tension in the clearing. "Whatever comes, I will protect you. Trust yourself, and trust that I will stand with you." The words resonated deep within her. She could feel the wolf stirring more insistently now, a mix of instinct and burgeoning power that surged at the combination of danger and assurance. His confidence in her, the faith he placed in her abilities, lent her courage she hadn't known she possessed. She drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling a subtle shift, a bond forming, delicate but undeniable, weaving strength and trust between them. Around the clearing, whispers continued, but Gabriel's presence cast a subtle authority that silenced overt dissent. Lila sensed that the elites understood that she now carried more than her own weight. She was a symbol of power, protection, and unexpected consequence. The tension, the anticipation, and the undercurrent of danger converged into a charged stillness, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes met Gabriel's, and in that gaze, a quiet connection sparked, something neither spoken nor acted upon, but potent in its implications. Her wolf hummed in agreement, urging her forward, emboldening her to meet what to come with courage and clarity. The sacred clearing had never felt so vast, nor so charged with tension. Packs from across the territories had converged, their numbers forming a living sea of fur, teeth, and watchful eyes. The air hummed with anticipation and unease as the largest gathering ever recorded prepared to witness a confrontation that would echo through pack history. Torches flickered along the perimeter, casting long shadows that danced among the assembled elites, while the pale silver of the moon bathed the clearing in ethereal light. Lila stepped forward, every movement deliberate, every breath steady. The weight of her new role pressed on her chest, a tangible reminder of the authority Gabriel had bestowed and the peril it invited. She could feel the inner wolf pulsing beneath her skin, ready to react, ready to defend, ready to claim her place. Every instinct whispered vigilance, and she allowed herself to absorb the energy of the gathering, letting it sharpen her senses and fortify her resolve. Gabriel remained a few paces behind her, his presence both protective and commanding. Even amid the crowded clearing, his gaze never wavered from her, a quiet anchor of authority and trust. She knew he would intervene if necessary, but she also understood that tonight she would have to demonstrate her own strength and command respect from the assembled packs. Selene's approach was deliberate, her movements calculated, every eye drawn to the confrontation. Her eyes blazing with fury and determination locked onto Lila's with lethal precision. The silence of the clearing seemed to deepen as she stopped mere feet away, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. The elites held their breath, knowing that the unfolding scene would define the hierarchy, loyalties, and power dynamics of every pack present. Lila's pulse thrummed in her ears, but her posture remained unwavering. The inner wolf hummed in anticipation, urging her to stand firm, to meet the challenge not with fear, but with authority. She lifted her chin, letting the moonlight highlight the resolve in her eyes. The clearing fell into a heavy, anticipatory silence, every pair of eyes fixed on the unfolding confrontation, the tension palpable enough to make the air feel thick and suffocating. Gabriel stepped forward, the very ground seeming to respond to his presence, commanding attention with the effortless authority of a king. His gaze swept the gathering, stopping only on Selene, whose fury simmered beneath a mask of controlled poise. "Selene," Gabriel's voice rang out, deep and commanding, carrying across the entire clearing. Every wolf, every pack leader, every beta and alpha felt the weight behind his words. "You will kneel before Lila Moonshadow and apologize for your actions tonight." A murmur spread like wildfire through the crowd. Heads turned, some in disbelief, others in admiration, and many in quiet speculation. To demand a public apology from the Alpha's sister, one of the most influential figures in the Bloodveil Pack, was unprecedented. Every eye was on Selene, waiting for her response, waiting to see whether she would defy or submit. Selene's lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes flared with a dangerous intensity. "I kneel," she spat, her voice low, venomous, and incredulous. The notion was preposterous to her, a violation of her carefully curated image, a direct threat to her power. Yet Gabriel's gaze never wavered. It was anchored in absolute authority, leaving no room for hesitation. Lila felt the collective attention settle upon her, and though her heart hammered in her chest, she stood firm. Her inner wolf coiled within her, urging courage, lending strength to every fiber of her being. She met Selene's glare with a calm that belied the storm of fear, anger, and anticipation she felt inside. Around them, the elites watched, understanding that this moment would mark a turning point in the politics of every pack present. Whispers spread like wildfire, speculating on the outcome, but none dared to intervene. Gabriel's authority made interference unthinkable. Selene's eyes blazed like twin storms as the weight of Gabriel's command settled over her. Every instinct screamed for her to assert dominance, to refuse submission, to crush the insolent Luna standing before her. She lifted her chin, her jaw tight, and with a voice sharp and deliberate, she spat out her defiance. "I will not kneel before her," Selene declared, her words cutting through the hush of the clearing like a blade. The murmurs surged through the gathered packs, a wave of shock and disbelief. Whispers rippled among the elites. How could the Alpha's sister defy a Lycan King's decree? How could she resist a Luna whom Gabriel himself had chosen? Lila's breath hitched, but she did not flinch. The inner wolf within her stirred at the tension, coiling and humming, attuned to the challenge and the danger. Fear and adrenaline mixed with something sharper, strength born from survival, from years of servitude that had forged resilience she had yet to fully realize. Her gaze met Gabriel's, and the subtle lift of his brow reinforced the unspoken command: remain steadfast. Around the clearing, the tension thickened. Some elites shifted uneasily, torn between loyalty to Selene and recognition of Gabriel's authority. Others watched with quiet satisfaction, eager to see the balance of power challenged. The air was taut, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in the silence, marking the seconds before an inevitable escalation. Selene's defiance was a spark, a deliberate test designed to provoke, to intimidate, to challenge. But Lila's presence, calm and unwavering, was a counterforce, a silent declaration that she would not be cowed, that her authority, though newly claimed, was real and recognized by the most powerful Lycan King alive. Lila took a slow, deliberate step forward, feeling the weight of every gaze fixed upon her. The moonlight shimmered across the clearing, illuminating her figure, and with each step, the hum of her inner wolf pulsed stronger, coiling around her instincts like living armor. She drew in a measured breath, steadying herself, feeling the strength Gabriel had instilled within her merge seamlessly with the power that had always been hidden inside. Selene. Lila's voice rang out, clear and unwavering, cutting through the tension like silver light through fog. Enough. You will kneel and apologize, as the Lycan King commanded. A hush fell over the clearing. Even the whispers of the elites stilled, stunned by the authority radiating from someone who had only recently been a servant. There was no fear in her tone, only calm certainty, a quiet power that demanded recognition. Lila's eyes, bright and unyielding, met Selene's with a force that left no room for resistance. Gabriel stepped subtly closer, his presence a shield and reinforcement, a silent message to the onlookers that Lila's command carried his weight as king. The air around them vibrated with energy, a magnetic pull between power, authority, and the raw potential of a young Luna claiming her rightful place. Selene faltered for the briefest moment, the flicker of doubt crossing her features, betraying the perfect mask of arrogance. The elites noticed, and the collective breath of the gathered packs seemed to synchronize with the tension, waiting, watching, knowing that the next moment would decide the hierarchy of influence and respect. Lila's wolf surged inside her, sensing vulnerability, warning her of danger, yet feeding her clarity and courage. She maintained her stance, unwavering, every subtle movement deliberate, every heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of the clearing. Gabriel's approving glance reinforced her, reminding her that she was no longer alone, and that her strength, both human and wolf, was acknowledged and backed by the most powerful being in the pack world. Selene's eyes flared, burning with anger and disbelief, yet the weight of Gabriel's presence and Lila's unwavering stance bore down upon her like a physical force. The clearing was silent, every pack holding its collective breath, waiting for the defiance to either crumble or escalate. Lila stood tall, shoulders squared, her inner wolf coiling with readiness, radiating authority that seemed to expand and fill the space around her. A flicker of hesitation crossed Selene's face. Pride, ambition, and ego warred with the stark reality before her. The elite's gaze, now fully attentive, mirrored the tension, the shock of witnessing an alpha's sister brought to a moment of accountability, under the command of someone she had deemed inferior mere nights ago. With a slow, deliberate motion, Selene lowered her gaze and sank to one knee before Lila. The motion was calculated, yet reluctant, a public acknowledgement of defeat that reverberated through the clearing. A gasp of surprise and a ripple of whispers swept through the gathered packs, some in astonishment, others in awe, and a few in quiet satisfaction. Lila's pulse thrummed in rhythm with the subtle vibrations of the clearing. She felt the wolf stirring, powerful and vigilant, ready to act if needed, yet guided by the clarity of her command and the presence of Gabriel nearby. The humiliation imposed on Selene was not cruel, it was justice, and it solidified Lila's authority in the eyes of every pack present. Gabriel's eyes gleamed with quiet approval. The faintest curve of a smile touched his lips. He did not need to intervene. Lila's strength, calm demeanor, and the wolf that pulsed within her had achieved what his presence alone could not. Respect and acknowledgement flowed toward her from the onlookers, reinforcing the seismic shift in power that had just occurred. Even as Selene murmured the apology, her voice tinged with venom, but restrained by obligation, Lila recognized the magnitude of this victory. It was more than a personal triumph. It was a declaration to every pack, a rewriting of boundaries, and a signal that the Luna who had once been a servant now commanded recognition. The clearing buzzed with a newfound energy, one that Lila could feel coursing through every nerve in her body. Selene's defeat had shifted the balance of power in a single, deliberate act, and every pack present sensed it. Lila's stature, once invisible and timid, now radiated authority. Her shoulders were straight, her chin lifted, and the wolf inside her thrummed with confidence and pride. Gabriel remained a quiet presence behind her, a subtle support, his eyes scanning the crowd with the calculating gaze of a ruler who knew the significance of this moment. Yet his focus lingered on Lila, and in that shared glance, an unspoken understanding passed between them. She was no longer just a servant or a Luna by declaration. She was a force to be reckoned with, acknowledged and respected by every eye watching her. Whispers among the elites transformed from doubt and curiosity into admiration and cautious respect. Leaders of rival packs exchanged glances, realizing that Lila's ascent had consequences that rippled beyond the Bloodveil Pack. Some nodded subtly, acknowledging the shift, while others tightened their grips on hidden daggers of political intrigue. Lila could sense it all, every subtle motion and breath in the clearing, her wolf attuned to the currents of power swirling around her. Gabriel's hand brushed briefly against the small of her back, a silent, protective gesture, and Lila felt the warmth of his presence merge with the thrill of victory. Their connection deepened, not in words, but in a quiet acknowledgement of trust, understanding, and the magnetic pull that neither of them could fully ignore. The night air carried tension, promise, and a charge that hinted at the romance quietly sparking between them. Yet even as respect and admiration settled around her, Lila's senses remained sharp. The shadows at the edge of the clearing whispered of lingering threats, unseen plots, and rival packs watching for the smallest sign of weakness. Her victory was monumental, but the game was far from over. The clearing hummed with cautious anticipation as the rival packs shifted, their murmurs fading into a tense silence. Lila stood at the center, her wolf coiled within her like a living, steady flame, attuned to every subtle movement in the crowd. The sacred gathering, once suspended by Gabriel's audacious claim, now resumed under a new order, one that bore the unmistakable mark of her presence. Gabriel moved with regal authority, signaling to the leaders that the treaty would proceed. Yet the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. Respect, tempered with awe, flowed toward Lila from every corner. The alliances, once carefully balanced on the edges of ego and pride, now recognized her as a figure of influence, Gabriel's Luna, a force whose voice carried weight in ways few could ignore. Lila inhaled the crisp night air, letting the weight of her new authority settle in her bones. Her hands, once calloused from servitude, now bore the grace of command. She watched as pack leaders signed their agreements, some nodding subtly in recognition of her strength, others exchanging wary glances, silently questioning how far this shift would ripple across territories. Gabriel stayed at her side, his presence unwavering, the wolfish gleam in his eyes reflecting both pride and protective instinct. He whispered in her ear, a low murmur meant only for her, "You've done well. Never forget your strength." The words were simple but potent, reinforcing the bond that had been quietly growing between them, entwining trust, respect, and something far more magnetic. Even as the formalities continued, Lila felt her senses heightened. Every glance, every murmur, every subtle shift in the air was magnified. The inner wolf purred, alert and ready, fully in tune with the power now coursing through her. She realized that she had moved beyond mere survival. She had become a presence, a force that could command attention and respect, even in the shadow of the most powerful leaders. The night air shimmered with the quiet pulse of power as the treaty continued, but Lila's focus had shifted inward. Each breath she took resonated with the rhythm of her inner wolf, a force that had grown steadily from fear and subservience into something commanding and alive. She felt it in her bones, in the subtle sharpening of her senses, in the confident stance she now held before every pack in the clearing. She was no longer just a servant or a newly claimed Luna. She was a presence, a force intertwined with Gabriel's authority and the raw, unyielding energy of her own wolf. Her thoughts drifted back to the journey that had brought her here. The slap, the humiliation, the whispers of doubt, and the sudden, extraordinary claim by Gabriel. Each moment had shaped her, refining her instincts and tempering her courage. She could feel the wolf's power surging beneath her skin, not as a threat, but as an extension of herself, lending clarity, strength, and instinctual confidence. Gabriel's gaze remained steady on her, a subtle mix of pride and quiet admiration flickering in his eyes. He had seen her potential from the first moment he noticed her in the shadows, but now, her mastery of her own strength, combined with the respect she commanded from the packs, revealed the true depth of her transformation. Every gesture, every glance, and every controlled movement radiated authority, and Lila realized she no longer needed only his protection. She could stand, fight, and lead in her own right. Around the clearing, the whispers and glances of the assembled elites acknowledged her power. Even the rival packs, initially skeptical or jealous, had begun to take note. This was a Luna who commanded presence and respect, not through fear, but through controlled strength, resilience, and poise. Lila's wolf, fully awake now, pulsed in tandem with her heartbeat, a living reminder of her new identity and capabilities. The moon hung high over the clearing, bathing the night in silver light that shimmered across the dew-covered grass. Lila and Gabriel stepped slightly apart from the gathering, the hum of the treaty fading into a background murmur. For the first time since the night began, the weight of responsibility eased, replaced by a quieter, more intimate tension that neither of them had fully acknowledged before. Gabriel's eyes lingered on Lila with a gaze that spoke volumes: pride, admiration, and something deeper, something that went beyond the bounds of pack politics. Lila felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with fear or survival. Her wolf stirred, attuned to the magnetic pull between them, a low, insistent hum echoing the rhythm of her racing heartbeat. "You handled yourself well tonight," Gabriel said softly, his voice carrying a tone of both authority and tenderness. "Not everyone could have stood as you did, with such composure, with such strength." Lila's cheeks warmed, and a small, shy smile tugged at her lips. I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. The words felt heavier than she intended, weighted with emotion she could barely name. Her inner wolf purred in agreement, a living echo of trust and connection, a reminder that this bond was as instinctual as it was deliberate. Gabriel stepped closer, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. He offered a subtle gesture of reassurance, a hand brushing briefly against her shoulder, the faintest touch that lingered in both memory and sensation. Lila felt it ripple through her, stirring curiosity, desire, and something tender yet electrifying that neither of them had yet allowed themselves to explore. The night air seemed to thrum around them, filled with possibilities and the promise of something neither danger nor tradition could contain. The world beyond the clearing faded, leaving only the magnetic pull, the shared breaths, and the unspoken acknowledgement that the connection between them was deepening, dangerous, thrilling, and entirely irresistible. Selene retreated into the shadows of the clearing, her fury simmering beneath a carefully constructed mask of composure. The public apology she had been forced to deliver still stung, a constant reminder of the humiliation she had endured in front of the entire gathering. Every glance from the elites, every murmur of approval toward Lila, cut through her pride like a sharpened blade. Her steps were silent, deliberate, each movement measured as if she were hiding from the world, yet planning a strategy that only she could see. The wolves who accompanied her cast uneasy looks at Lila and Gabriel, aware that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Selene's mind churned with calculated malice, plotting ways to reclaim her pride, her influence, and perhaps even her position within the Bloodveil Pack. Yet even as schemes formed in her mind, a cold, gnawing fear lingered, the knowledge that she was weakened, exposed, and that her actions now carried risk. Lila, meanwhile, stood under the moonlight, sensing the faint tension in the shadows. Her inner wolf hummed with awareness, alert to the lingering threat that Selene represented. Though victorious, Lila understood that power was never absolute. It was fluid, shifting with every glance, every word, and every silent calculation made by those who opposed her. She allowed herself a quiet moment to breathe, feeling the strength of her wolf pulsing through her veins, a steady reassurance that she could meet any challenge. Gabriel remained near, a subtle presence of reassurance and quiet authority. He observed Selene's retreat with a critical gaze, noting the danger that still lingered in the Alpha's sister's mind. The bond between him and Lila had deepened through shared trials, a connection forged not just by desire, but by mutual recognition of strength, courage, and resilience. The clearing gradually settled into a rhythm, the murmurs of awe and cautious respect blending with the steady acknowledgement of Lila's rise. Leaders and elites shifted subtly in their alliances, recalibrating loyalties in the wake of her public triumph. Every pack was aware now that the dynamics had changed, and Lila was no longer invisible, no longer a servant relegated to the shadows. Lila observed the subtle negotiations, the exchanged glances, and the cautious nods, her senses heightened, her inner wolf alert. The political landscape had transformed overnight, and she understood that each gesture, each whispered conversation, carried weight. She allowed herself a quiet smile, savoring the knowledge that her presence now held influence, an influence reinforced not by fear, but by respect, courage, and the visible authority granted by Gabriel. Gabriel's presence remained a constant, a silent reassurance that their bond was recognized and respected across the packs. His subtle nods and quiet glances spoke volumes, signaling trust, approval, and shared understanding. Lila felt the wolf stirring within her, a pulse of power and awareness that reminded her she was capable of navigating this new hierarchy with strength, clarity, and cunning. Some pack leaders approached cautiously, offering formal greetings, apologies for earlier dismissiveness, or suggestions for cooperation. Others lingered at the edges, testing the waters, curious yet wary of the shifting power structure. Lila's composure remained flawless, each interaction measured, deliberate, and infused with the authority she had earned through trials, courage, and resilience. The moon hung full and radiant over the clearing, its silver light bathing the victorious packs in an ethereal glow. Lila stood at the center, her shoulders squared, her gaze calm and unwavering, a figure of quiet authority. The once hidden servant had emerged from shadows into a presence that commanded respect, not through fear, but through strength, resilience, and the undeniable bond she now shared with Gabriel. Gabriel stepped closer, his imposing form radiating protection, power, and a magnetic pull that drew Lila instinctively toward him. The air between them thrummed with unspoken tension, the promise of something tender, dangerous, and exhilarating all at once. His hand brushed hers, subtle but deliberate, and Lila felt the warmth and reassurance radiate into her very core. Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, an unspoken understanding blossomed, a bond forged through trials, victories, and the raw, unyielding pulse of the wolf within them both. The packs around them had taken note. Leaders who had once doubted, elites who had once whispered, now looked on with respect, acknowledgement, and a quiet admiration. Alliances subtly shifted, rivalries softened, and the hierarchy of power had been irrevocably redefined. Lila was no longer invisible, no longer the meek servant she had been. She was a Luna, a leader, a force that carried both authority and the undeniable influence of Gabriel's unwavering support. As the moonlight wrapped them in silver glow, Lila allowed herself a rare moment to breathe, to feel the wolf thrumming with contentment, strength, and readiness. Gabriel's gaze held hers, steady, reassuring, and charged with promise, a connection that went beyond words, beyond politics, into something fiercely personal and dangerously intimate. And so, under the full moon, Lila and Gabriel's bond was forged, not just through power, but through trust, courage, and the unbreakable pulse of the wolf within them. But as the shadows stir and new challenges lie ahead, their story is far from over. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and show your support. Subscribe now for more thrilling werewolf shifter romances, forbidden love stories, and unforgettable battles of power and loyalty. Comment below. Who impressed you the most? Lila, Gabriel, or even Selene? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't miss our next grouping story. Turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next one.